Hey everyone, this is Steve Bishop from ProgrammingMadeEasy.com, and welcome to another one of my In My Opinion videos. So this video series is an opportunity for you guys to ask me questions about the industry, or really pretty much whatever. I'm up for anything. But typically I answer those questions that come in the technology field or programming field. So if you guys have a question that you want to ask me and just kind of want to pick my brain about something, just drop me a line in the comment section below this video. And if it's a good one and I've got the time, then I will answer it for you. Now, today's video is going to be on a topic that is brought up by Giovanni Alissier. And I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that last name incorrectly, but Giovanni's last name is spelled E-L-I-C-I-E-R. And Giovanni has asked me, well, actually, he first starts out by saying he's interested in becoming a DBA. So he would like to know my opinion or recommendations about three different things. So I'm going to get to those three topics and those three questions in just a little bit. The first thing I wanted to do was talk about DBA, okay? Because not everybody that's coming to this channel and is watching this video is going to be aware of what a DBA is. A DBA is a database administrator, and they are in charge of managing and maintaining databases, as the name might suggest. Now, a DBA is going to be in charge of a lot of different things regarding that maintenance and management. They're going to be in charge of things like writing queries to massage the data and extract it for the various applications that are going to be consuming the data from the database. So they're going to be creating queries both to read data from it, to write data to it, to update some of the different records, and even delete different records. So they're going to be doing all these queries. They're going to be writing these queries to do this. And sometimes they're in charge with refactoring old queries, making them run faster, finding out why they're underperforming, and try to fix whatever problem might be involved with that particular query. Some other things that a DBA is going to be in charge of are things like maintenance and security. So when it comes to security, they're going to be the ones that are setting the permissions on the various tables and databases so that different people have access to the different databases and tables that they should have access to. As far as the maintenance goes, that's kind of a wide subject. There's a wide array of different things. There's things like maintaining indexes, and indexes are these things on your tables that allow your queries to run a lot faster, but they need to be updated on a regular basis. And so you create a maintenance plan, a maintenance schedule to re-index the database at a regular interval. Then there's also things like, of course, backups, needing to create backups of your database and test the data that comes from those backups to make sure that your backups are valid. They're also going to be in charge of some architectural and infrastructural type of things. Things like, linking up two databases to each other, making, one server talk to another server, a publisher or subscriber situation where two databases are basically sharing information back and forth between each other so that there's some redundancy and one database can replace the other in a real quick time frame. Then there's, just communication between two different servers. Sometimes one server needs to be able to ask a database from a completely other server. And these are called linked servers, and you need to be able to set that up. And that's typically something that a DBA is going to manage. So there's a lot of things involved here with the job of being a DBA. There's troubleshooting issues, there's writing queries, there's maintenance, there's planning, there's architecture, figuring out, this new feature's coming in from somebody as a new requirement. We need to figure out what's the best way to get that data into the database. Should we do it as a many-to-many type of relationship between that new table and some of the old tables? What should be the primary key? Should it be a composite key or an auto-seeded key? Just a lot of architectural type of questions that DBAs typically need to be able to answer so that the database gets designed in a proper way. And oftentimes, they're also in charge with something called normalization, or refactoring the database to make it better, make it perform better by splitting out some of the bigger tables into smaller tables so that, maybe some data that gets regularly accessed, but other data from other parts of the same table aren't as accessed as regularly, and so they should be split up into a different table. So there's a refactoring type of thing that could be going on. There's the architectural, there's the maintenance, there's the security, along with just the querying itself. So there's a lot involved with being a DBA. That's a very big job description. And that honestly doesn't even really cover the modern DBA anymore. I think that's kind of more what the job was intended to be. What I just talked about was what the DBA job was intended to become. But being a DBA in today's world tends to mean a bit more than just those different topics that I talked about. And we'll get into a little bit of that a little bit later when we talk about one of the questions that Giovanni's asked. But first, let's go ahead and talk about the first question that Giovanni asked me here. It's, should he get a DBA certification or should he get a master's degree? Well, not to be a cop-out or anything, but it depends. There's a few different things that you need to consider when you're thinking about whether or not you want to just get a certificate or if you want to go ahead and get a full degree from a 4 or 6 year college. If you're looking to get a job with, like, say, a Fortune 500 company, they're going to pretty much require a master's or at least a bachelor's degree in the area of the job that you're looking to get hired in. So if that's your goal, if your goal is to go work for one of these giant enterprises, then you're going to absolutely have to have one of those degrees. It's either that or you have to have like 15 years of experience, and not a lot of people in this industry have that much experience. The technology just, hasn't really been around quite that long. It's obviously been around longer than 15 years, but the number of people that are in it tend to not have 15 years of experience. So they are looking for people that have a degree, and if they've got a lot of experience to back up that degree, all the better. Now, if you're talking about the smaller to medium-sized businesses and even some of the larger businesses, they are very welcoming to a certificate of some sorts that says that you completed the courses required to get certified in a particular discipline. So if you get a DBA certificate from some sort of third-party authority, there are plenty of businesses that are willing to take that and run with it. And the reasons for that are actually kind of interesting. If you think about it from the perspective of the business, they're kind of in a bit of a duplicitous situation. They want someone with experience and knowledge, but they want to be able to mold that person. They want to be able to mold them to their way of thinking about how the design and setup should be. So regardless of the amount of experience that you have, maybe you have 15 years of experience and you've gone to a 4 or 6 year degree, college, and gotten your degree, that big giant enterprise is still not going to want to hear what you have to say about how they should redesign their system, right? They're going to want you to just basically hop on board and do what they've been doing, just continue to do it, and add those new features, add those things that their users ask for to the database. They don't want you to come in and start making demands about how the database needs to be refactored and changed to be more like what you learned in college, right? That's not what they're going to want. They want someone to come in and just simply continue to do the status quo because the business has been running for however long, doing the business practices the way that they've been doing it. And you are a brand new person to this and you don't understand the reasoning behind some of it. So they're not going to want to listen to you and your bright ideas, no matter how good they are. They may very well be the best direction that the company could go for. But the simple fact is that they remain rigid in the way that they've been doing things. They're not going to want to hear it. They're just going to want you to come in and continue to do whatever they have been doing in the past. Even if it's causing the business tremendous security breaches and that sort of thing. Honestly, a lot of businesses are just stubborn about it. They don't want to have change. So if that's how a Fortune 500 company is going to be, think about the smaller to medium-sized businesses that are bringing you on, perhaps with a lot less experience. They're willing to take a shot on you, but you don't have the experience and you're coming in with a certificate, not a degree. Well, they're probably going to be thinking basically the same thing. I'm not going to listen to this young upstart who just got out of college or just got a certificate tell me how to run my business and tell me how to structure my data and tell me that we need to do all sorts of new things to our applications to conform to his changes that he or she wants done. That's just not something that's going to go over very well with anybody. So just keep that in mind. When you go for these job interviews, depending upon which company you go to, it may be a little different in those situations, but the majority of them, I'm going to just take a guess here, 95% of them are just going to want you to come in and maintain the status quo and just do the same thing that's always been done in their environment and just keep it up and running. So as far as whether or not you should get a DBA certification or go get a full 4 to 6 year degree is largely going to depend upon, like I said, which kind of business you're looking to get into and where you see your career going. If you are planning on just being a consultant, then just getting some of that experience working for one of those companies and getting a few years of experience and then learning it and then building up your own customer base, maybe that's an option for you. And maybe that's all you need is that certificate. I know people that don't have any certification and they just they know their stuff and they become consultants and they have very productive careers. So, a certification is obviously very beneficial because potential clients and customers are going to want to see that certification. And a 4-year or 6-year degree, all the better, right? Your potential employer, if they see that you've got that 4 to 6 year degree, they're going to know that you at least complete what you start, right? I know a lot of employers, they don't really even care what you got your degree in, just so long as you got one, because it shows that you have commitment. You are willing to stick through with something. You are willing to complete what you started. And if you get a certificate on top of that, so typically they want something at least, similarly related. If you got a 4-year degree in engineering or something, that might work. They might be willing to accept that. But if you got a 4-year degree in liberal arts or something like that, well, they may not necessarily consider that to be applicable to the job, even if you get this certificate. But having that certificate to go along with the college experience, even if it was in something like liberal arts or poli-sci or something like that, it still does show them you are willing to commit to something and see it through to the end. And a lot of employers will find that valuable. So getting a master's degree, getting a bachelor's degree, or even an associate's degree, some sort of degree of some sorts, at least shows a potential employer that you are willing to commit and follow through. And then the fact that you got certified, either through through the college or through some sort of third-party agency, at least tells them you know what you're talking about, you know what you're doing, and we can stick you in this environment. You're going to learn what we want you to do in a relatively quick manner. You're going to speak the lingo when you're sitting next to the senior developer. You're going to know what they're talking about. You're going to know how to talk to them, and you're going to be able to communicate and fit right in. That's what we're looking for as an employer, and that certificate, at the bare minimum, at least tells me that. And honestly, if you're some guy coming into that situation, just think about it. If you're coming into that type of scenario, it's just a better idea to just kind of, okay, yeah, I see how this is working, and hold your reservations, hold back on any sort of doubts. Don't try to be the smartest person in the room and prove your concepts are better because you learned all this fantastic stuff at school. They're just going to think of you as the know-it-all, and they're going to reject you. All right, and they're going to not like you at all, and they're definitely not going to listen to your ideas. So just be very careful, be very judicious about expressing your opinions about how things need to be done. And if you can get enough people, that are like-minded about a particular concept, maybe you can affect change early on. But if you are that person, that's driving that effort, you're going to be seen as kind of the know-it-all person, and that's a very dangerous spot to be in. People will resent you, people won't respect you, and it's just kind of a bad way to go. So I know that's a bit tangential to what we're talking about here. I know that's not exactly answering Giovanni's question, but I do think it's important to talk about in this type of discussion, that you just need to be aware of it, that when you're dealing with your first start at a new job, they're really not going to want to hear about it for at least a couple of years before you can start piping up about, some of the changes they might need to make. So anyway, moving on to Giovanni's next question. He asks, SQL Server or Oracle? I'm seeing there's a significant amount of companies using Oracle. So he's wondering which one of these database systems should he go and learn. Again, I know this is kind of a cop-out, but I'm going to say it depends. And let me just kind of get into this here. Oracle was kind of the gold standard for a long time. I don't know, I use that term loosely. Oracle was really kind of the industry leader for a long time in databases for the enterprise type of scenarios. If you've got a big giant business, you run your database off of Oracle. And that meant that the price point for Oracle was pretty expensive. Getting an Oracle database up and running was a pretty expensive venture. When it came to Microsoft SQL Server, they were offering services for quite a while, but it really wasn't until I'd say Server 2008, and especially Server 2008 R2, where SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, really started to become a competitor in the marketplace at a much bigger scale. I mean, it had a bit of a market share, but really right around 2008, it really started to come into its own. And this was for several different reasons. First of all, the price point for Microsoft SQL Server is lower than Oracle, or at least it was at that point. It was much lower. And because of that, the smaller to medium-sized businesses were looking at that as the solution because it's a lower entry point and it's less expensive for us to get. So let's get that instead of this big giant Oracle database. And not only that, but if you think about the technical skills required to set up an Oracle database, it's a bit of a different skill set. Oracle database administrators, typically they are the ones that do the entire installation, from setting up the operating system, which typically is going to be a Linux box, to setting up the Oracle service, on that Linux box, and then setting up the database with the security principles and all sorts of stuff like that. So the DBA is really in charge of everything from the bottom up to getting that database set up. So that requires a lot of skills. You need to know Linux. You need to know how to get stuff installed on Linux. You'd have to know how to install Oracle, which is a very complicated setup to begin with, and you need to know how to set up all these databases and do the security principles. And understand that with Oracle, you're talking about an integrated security system. So the users that have access to Oracle are managed and maintained by the Oracle database. With Microsoft SQL Server, you can actually put the security principles, you can get the security principles that are supposed to have access to those databases from Active Directory. So an Active Directory is Microsoft Windows domain user management system, right? So if you have a domain, you're using Active Directory to manage your users. Now, you still need to go into the SQL Server to say which one of those users gets set up, but the concept is easy enough for regular IT administrators to know how to go in and set up security principles on those different databases. It's something that a DBA doesn't necessarily have to do. If you have a good enough IT admin, they will set up the Windows operating system, right, which an IT admin already would be doing. They're setting up all of the Active Directory security users. They are doing a software installation. The software installation for Microsoft SQL Server is much easier than Oracle. So an IT admin can go and install your database and install your Microsoft SQL Server, and they can do all of your security stuff. So all of those different checkboxes for what a DBA has to do in Oracle can be done by an IT admin and not by a DBA. And that means that the cost of a smaller to medium-sized business to get that done, well, if they already have an IT admin they already have the skill set to do that, and they don't need to hire an expensive DBA with all this special knowledge to go and handle that. Now, they still need a DBA in a lot of cases, most cases, to do the actual administration of the database. Now, so with this lower entry point for Microsoft SQL Server, with less required in order to get it installed, a lower price point, and being more, now that Microsoft is getting a bigger market share, that means that there are a lot more jobs available for Microsoft DBAs because it's getting larger. It's a much bigger market share now. And if you go online and you go to one of those job searching companies like CareerBuilder or Jobbing.com or Monster or something like that, and you do a Microsoft SQL Server DBA job lookup, you'll see the list is yay big. It fills the whole page. But if you go look for an Oracle DBA, you're going to find that it's a much smaller list. You might find 1 or 2 jobs. And that's because more and more of these smaller to medium-sized businesses are using Microsoft SQL Server rather than Oracle. Now, this means that if you do know Oracle, if you learn Oracle and that's your primary database, you can ask for a higher wage because your job has more skills required in order to perform it. You can do more stuff with Oracle than a regular DBA would with SQL Server. So because it takes so much more, because Oracle is more proprietary, because it requires a higher skill set, because there are fewer people who know Oracle, you can ask for more money as an Oracle DBA. With Microsoft SQL Server, the trade-off is that you may have a lot of job opportunities. You may be able to find many more jobs to pick from, but typically they're not going to get paid quite as much as an Oracle DBA. So that's just something to think about. It's an interesting thing. Now, along with the introduction in 2008 with Microsoft SQL Server becoming so much more ubiquitous throughout the industry, one of the smart things that Microsoft did was that they introduced a whole suite of things. And they actually had a bunch of these things before 2008 too, but really one of the things that was happening was that Microsoft was packaging SQL Server services along with the database. So things like SQL Server integration services and reporting services and analysis services. So along with the database, you were getting this full suite of services to go along with it. And what happened was that the job of a DBA was now to not only manage the database, but to manage these other services, even if they don't really have anything to do with the database. For example, reporting services. What do reports have to do with managing data? Well, nothing, right? They're just reports. You may have to write a query to go get the data, but the structure of this thing is really something that kind of is more developerish, right? Somebody creating a report to display data and formatting and yada, yada, yada. That seems more like a developerish user interface type of thing. But that is now the responsibility of the DBA because it's part of the suite of applications that comes with Microsoft SQL Server. So a Microsoft SQL Server DBA needs to know all these other types of services like reporting services and integration services. And with integration services, it goes even further than that because SQL Server integration services has these different packages and they have some regular tasks that you just need to configure and tweak in order to make the data stream the way that you need it to. But there's also scripting. And in a lot of cases, these packages need some sort of scripting. And the programming languages that are used for those scripts in SQL Server integration services is C# and VB.NET. So you need to know SQL, you need to know how to manage and maintain databases, you need to know SQL Server reporting services, and you need to know C# and VB.NET so that you can do this SSIS. So the amount of things that you need to know as a DBA in today's world for Microsoft SQL Server is grown immensely. It's just huge. So just this actually kind of relates to Giovanni's first question when he's talking about getting certification. Just make sure that you're also getting certified in those other disciplines, because the majority of these companies are going to want you to have that kind of knowledge. If you're going to be doing a Microsoft SQL Server DBA work, you are going to be required to do, reporting services and integration services, and not so much analysis services, but those other two definitely. So just be aware of that's something that you're going to need in your education. Now, finally, Giovanni asks, which DB can be used for web and mobile apps, and which of those are more convenient for it? And let me just start off by saying this. If your database is exposed to the internet in any way, shape, or form, you have a very serious architectural problem. Your database should never be accessible directly through the internet. Okay, that is just a big, big no-no. Instead, what you need is some sort of middle tier. So you've got your data down here, right? You've got your database with all the data and tables and everything down here. Up above that, you need some sort of API coded layer. Now, this could be in Ruby, it could be in PHP, it could be in a .NET language, it could be in really pretty much anything, just so long as it is some sort of coding for the web, some sort of web layer that does the communication back to the database. And this middle layer, this API, is not something that the user directly interacts with. It's just the business logic and the way that a client would plug into it. And when I say client, I mean like a web application or a phone app, like a Google app or an iPhone app. Those client applications up here are going to be asking the API layer for things, okay? And the API will respond back to the clients. So the clients have no direct connection whatsoever to the database, okay? The database is doing its thing, and it only communicates back and forth with the API. So it's important that you build that API middle layer for several different reasons, primarily the security, right? Because if you put your database out there online and you make it, available, and if somebody just has a username and password to connect to it, and then you put all your business logic and your connection strings and all that sort of stuff in those clients up there, and they directly connect to the database down below, then you are sending out, along with your client applications, everything that a hacker would need to know in order to how to get into your database, right? Because in that client application, you've got your connection strings, you've got the web server that's being connected to, the SQL server, which port it's being connected to, all that stuff. All that information would be freely available to any person that wants to decode your application. And you know how easy that is. If you've been watching my ASP.NET video series, you just need a special little tool like ILSpy to actually get into the code to see those kind of things. So, putting your connection strings and your usernames and passwords and stuff into those applications, client applications, those user interfaces, is a terrible, terrible idea. It's just going to give you many, many security problems. But not only that, that extra API layer helps as kind of an interpreter. And it remains agnostic. It doesn't know what kind of client is connecting to it, right? Unless you really want it to. You could tell it that you have to use some particular client in order to connect to it. But typically you want it to not really care what type of client is connecting to it. So if it is a Google app, if it's an Android app, or if it's an iPhone app, or if it's a web app, it doesn't matter as far as the API is concerned, because the API just responds to requests. Now, an API is going to be something like, Windows, like WSC services or Web API, or it's going to be a PHP application or Rails or something like that. And it's going to be responding to those web requests that come from those clients, right? So those clients send a web request to that API. The API takes that request, talks to the database. The database, has its query run against it, sends the response back to the API. The API might reformat the data, or depending upon the user's security level, determine, okay, well, actually they're not supposed to have access to this bit of information, but they can have access to this kind of information, and then spits it back out to the client. And that way the client application up here doesn't need to know any business rules. Okay, it's just a dummy interface. All it does is it has graphics on it. The user can click on a button and it sends a request. The user can type in their username and password, click on a button, and that sends it to the API. The API is the one that does all the calculations and stuff. And that means your server is a big, nice, big, beefy server that's going to be doing all the processing and come up with a fast response because it's directly tied in to the network with the database. And it's going to process really fast and then return that response back to the client. And the client doesn't, it just sits there and does a click button on the button and then waits for a response. And then when the response comes back, it displays it to the user. So that dummy interface, that GUI, right, the user interface that's up there, it doesn't really care what kind of programming language is in that middle tier or what that API is, just so long as it gets a response properly formatted to what it expects. And it can send a command that it expects is supposed to work. And if it doesn't work, it's, it needs to have some sort of appropriate error that it can anticipate and work with. Then the database is completely separate too. So you have these different layers of separation so that you can interchange these different parts. Okay? So if one day my boss came to me and said, I don't want SQL Server anymore, I want to use Oracle. Well, all I have to do is load up all the data from my SQL Server to that Oracle database, change my API to point to the new database, and done. That's it. I'm completed. The process to do that type of interchange should be very, very simple. As long as you don't have tightly coupled code that requires a particular type of database, which we do see all the time, and that's usually a pain point for a lot of different companies. But that middle layer, that API, should not really care what database is being requested of. The only thing it needs to know is that, I can make this connection request using this string, and I need to have the drivers installed on that server. So whatever the API layer, the server is that API layer is on, needs to have the appropriate drivers to communicate with the database. But other than that, the setup should be the same. It should be simple. It doesn't matter whether it's Oracle or SQL Server. And this is an important concept in development. You need to be able to interchange out these different parts anytime, because the nature of business is constantly changing. People ask for new features, ask for changes, ask for new database. Hey, we can't find any Oracle database administrators. How difficult would it be for us to move over to SQL Server? And you need to be able to make that change. But also things like developers, right? When developers are developing the code, they are communicating with some sort of database, some sort of fake mock-up database with some fake data in it, typically. Sometimes it depends. Sometimes they use mocks. It depends upon who's doing the development. Might be test-driven development, so they would, be using their own data set internally with the code instead of a database. But either way, they can jump back and they jump from a developer's database over here, right? This developer's database that's over here. And they need to then plug into the programmers, the production environment, right? So they've got the production environment. How do they jump from one to the other? Well, they need to be able to just simply, change out like a connection string or some sort of class object through dependency injection, and just kind of, jump back and forth from one server to the other, depending upon the scenario. And then what if there is some sort of failure in the production server? Then there needs to be a failover. There needs to be a third server that's in place that if I can't communicate with this server, then go talk to that server. And the code needs to be able to do that. And it shouldn't care which one of those servers or which kind of database it's communicating with, as long as it can ask the same tables exist, the same relationships exist, the same queries can be written to get the same type of data. As long as that's in place, it doesn't matter what kind of database is there. Now, with that being said, I would prefer Microsoft SQL Server over Oracle in almost all cases. Oracle is an absolute pain to work with. Oracle, especially, probably the biggest thing that I remember about working with Oracle, and I've worked with Oracle a few times, but the biggest pain point for me with Oracle is getting the client installed, getting the driver installed on one of the computers that needs to connect to the database. That driver is a really difficult thing to get. You got to go find several layers of website from the Oracle website to go find the correct driver to install for communicating with that Oracle database. It can be a real nightmare trying to find the correct driver. Whereas with Microsoft SQL Server, it's just kind of already in any sort of Windows box. So if you're running Windows, you already have the SQL Server drivers most likely. So getting those set up and creating an ODBC connection to the SQL Server is just a snap. Whereas with Oracle, you've got to go through a monumental installation process. And then, of course, since I'm typically a .NET developer, I do mostly C# applications. It just automatically fits in with Microsoft SQL Server. It's just kind of the two things just go hand in hand, and they've been designed essentially to work well with one another. So I prefer Microsoft SQL Server. Now, your scenario might be that maybe MySQL is a good option. Maybe the free MySQL is something you could do, or PostgreSQL, or maybe the Google Cloud, databases. There's some databases that Google offers, and then there's Amazon Web Services. They offer some databases. So there's a lot of different databases that you can plug into. And again, it shouldn't really matter. It should be all up to you. What do you feel comfortable working with? What is the database that you like the most and you find the easiest to work with? That should be the answer. It's not really about my opinion as far as which one I prefer, because you're the one that's going to have to work with it, and whichever one you get the experience working with is the one that you should go with. And again, that API layer should not care which one you're doing. If it does care, then you're not doing the API layer right. Just kind of my opinion on that. So anyway, there you guys go. That is my video for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give me that thumbs up so that I know that you enjoyed it, and don't be afraid to give me a comment. And again, if you have one of those questions that you want to ask, something that's been nagging you, even if it's not technology related and it's maybe something else entirely and you just kind of want to pick my brain, just drop me that comment in the section below here. And like I said, if it's a good one and I've got the time, then I will certainly answer it for you. Anyway, hope to see you guys at the next In My Opinion video, and I hope you guys really enjoy this one and learn something from it, and I hope to see you guys, like I said, at the next video. Until then, ciao.